and welcome to the latest in a series of webinars brought to you by Compass Healthcare. This one quite important and timely, really. It's about well-being, physical and mental well-being in the workplace, and in our case, especially in the healthcare environments. And those environments that we've all doubt are going to be the NHS hospitals that we work in, private health and care homes in particular. So those three environments are the ones that we're going to be focusing on, but we will talk more generally about health and well-being in the workplace, and I'm sure that will come out as we go to the panels later on. Before we do meet the panel, I just wanted to give you some reflections on a little whistle-stop tour of 4 NHS hospitals that I was lucky enough to visit in the last 10 days. And I particularly wanted to do that because these are the hospitals that were in the teeth of the COVID crisis first time around, and with a second wave looking like it's rolling up on us now. I wanted just to do a little my own health check on the health and well-being of our teams. And I have to tell you honestly and without filter that all the teams that I met, be they private or public, but especially the NHS teams, were feeling pretty confident. They weren't looking forward to a second wave. Many of them felt it was inevitable, but they were fairly confident that they were well placed to deal with it in a better way. Now, obviously, that reflects on their mental well-being. Certainly from my viewpoint, looking at it externally, might be filled with horror and dread with the prospect of another wave of hospital COVID infections. But I just honestly wanted to reflect that to those that you are listening, that the teams were, I guess I'm going to say, they were ready. And I found that particularly uplifting, and they are very courageous. So today is about the importance of well-being. What we're going to explore is what steps should we be taking really proactively to support our teams, our clients, particularly their morale and motivations, and what can we do? We're going to explore more generally and theoretically what impact does well-being have on staff motivation. I think we all would agree it has a strong impact, but try to quantify that a little bit. Because we're a food company principally, obviously we're going to touch upon the future of food and hydration, especially in supporting notions of well-being. And of course, other elements of well-being, what are they that we should be considering, whether that's building design, all kinds of other factors that you wouldn't immediately think of, and they will come out in due course. So to help me with all of that, I've got a tremendous panel with me this morning, 2 external members and 2 beloved members of my own team, and I'm going to introduce you to them now. I'm just going to tell you who they are and what they do, and when we come to them in the webinar, they'll expand on their particular role, so you'll hear a bit more about what they can do. So I'm going to start with Andy Berman, who is the British Dietetic Association Chief Executive, a very important individual in our lives, and particularly as we'll come to Maxine Carts in a moment, especially in relation to patient dining. So welcome, Andy. We also have Mark Giles, who's the founder of a company called Salubrium. Now, my Latin is a little bit rusty, Mark, but I'm guessing that's something to do with a healthy place, Salubrium, some sort of element of healthy place. I'm sure you'll enlighten me when we come to you. We have our very own Sean McLaughlin, who is the contract director for a private healthcare chain of clients that we have here in London particularly, but he has had an extensive time in the NHS too, so welcome, Sean. And also Maxine Carts is one of our very senior dietitians in particularly in and around the NHS business, and who's been in the industry for a great deal of time. So I hope you'll agree that's a really good eclectic mix of people, and I'm sure this topic's going to go well as a consequence to that. So I hope I haven't forgotten anything that I need to do that's important. So with that, I'm just going to jump right in and start with Andy, if I may. Good morning, Andy. Before you introduce yourself, the question I wanted to particularly ask you after you've done that is this notion of the power of 3, particularly in relation to dietetics and nutrition. So how nurses, dietitians and hospital caterers to work together to really maximize that particular element. So over to you, Andy, for the introduction first.
Many thanks, Steve, and good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to be here. It's a really exciting opportunity to talk about something that's close to all our hearts, obviously. And with nearly 10,000 members involved with food, diet and nutrition. The power of three is actually crucial, particularly if we think about hospital and other care settings, because the power of three is very much about a multidisciplinary approach, which is crucial if we're going to talk about patient nutrition and hydration. And the power of three comes down to hospital caterers, dietitians and nurses working as a team to ensure that there's a strategy within their own working environment to deliver healthy nutrition to patients to aid with recovery, but also that there's effective hydration on the wards. And it's quite a complex field, of course, because of the nature of the way hospitals and related environments are structured. But the only way you can really tackle that is actually having a multidisciplinary team approach to that.
Yeah, and you can see if those parts aren't working together, then I guess it's not going to be successful. So absolutely, from my own personal experience, can reflect the veracity and the importance of what you're saying. I mean, I'm just going to jump across to Maxine because it's obviously related. Maxine, you've been kind of all over patient dining and dietetics over the years. I'm going to take you out of your comfort zone a little bit and just say, look, how important is nutrition in a hospital workplace for people like staff in particular, because they look after those patients? You know, I know that patient dining is where our particular expertise is, but you must have a view on kind of nutritionally based well-being for staff in hospitals. What role, how important it is to their well-being?
It's vital because food and nutrition affect our well-being, both mental and physical. And it's really important that we, as providers of food to staff and visitors in hospital, can give choice. I think that's one of the key choices, and also the information to make sure that people can make the decision they want to make. You know, and I've seen a huge amount of change in the last 20, 30 years about how we approach that. And I think we're going to see even more change in the future about calorie labeling on menus and about whether or not things are mandated, you know, the sequence that we've had to adhere to. So, I mean, it's a massive area. And, you know, as a dietitian, on one hand, I think we should just be providing good variety and healthy choices for people to make sure that when they're in a hospital, they can eat healthily if they wish. But on the other hand, I still think that we should be offering some of the indulgent foods as well, because people have a choice, and hospitals are stressful places. They're stressful for our staff. And if somebody comes off a stressful shift and they want a bar of chocolate, I don't think we should be stopping them from having a bar of chocolate. It's my personal view. But yeah, it's very important to their overall physical and mental well-being.
In some ways, I guess the sort of the hospital restaurant will be some form of sanctuary, won't it? It will be an escape from the kind of intensity of what they're doing. So it's really important we provide that little moment of escape. And I think that's what you're trying to explain there. So before I leave you, Maxine, I just wanted to ask you the question that many people might be thinking about in listening to this. Tell me briefly, if you can, sort of the principal differences between the dietetic requirements of say we are a seriously injured COVID patient who is ill in hospital, and the other role of dietetics for patients in hospital. What's the principal kind of impact of a COVID patient in hospital on dietetics, or vice versa?
Okay, so some COVID patients will have malnutrition. It might be that the symptoms of the disease, so for example, a loss of taste and smell can lead to a loss of appetite, and that in turn can lead to reduced intake. And we also know that some of the symptoms of respiratory diseases, such as the breathlessness or persistent coughing, can affect how much people eat. However, once somebody is nutritionally vulnerable, the treatment that we would give would be the same as we would give for anyone else who's nutritionally vulnerable, as long as, of course, the patient can eat, and that would be dictated by their illness at that time. So we know, for example, that many of the severely ill patients with COVID-19 would have been on a ventilator, and they would have therefore been nil by mouth, and they would have been fed artificially. So it's only once people start to recover and begin to eat that then it's about trying to get as much protein and as many calories into them as possible. And that would depend on their abilities to chew and swallow. It would depend on their appetite. So generally the treatment would be the same, in that you would want to give them energy-dense foods, protein-dense foods. But sometimes with COVID-19 patients, they would have dysphagia, they would have problems swallowing. So we might be giving them foods that were of a different texture, that were easier to swallow.
Yeah.
But the strategies are basically the same.
Well, it just all comes back to food as medicine, doesn't it? And I can certainly confirm that at the height of the first wave, conventional patient dining, as we would understand it, so a regular meal for patients, fell off by about 50% in hospitals. So volumes dropped significantly. So come across to Mark, if I may now. I mean, Mark, there were some hints there of kind of sanctuaries in hospital and the health and well-being of an escape from the intensity of it. But so how does that link back to perhaps a more holistic strategy for health and well-being in a workplace generally? I mean, you probably have a strong view on that, don't you?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I think for me, the thing that makes health and wellbeing strategy work is that the employee and the people actually understand and know what you mean by health and wellbeing strategy. So, you know, what are you trying to do for them as a loyal employee? How are you trying to support them? But also a big part of this is educating people, educating them on the importance of diet, educating them on the importance of wellbeing, what it means for them, their families, and then how that replicates back into the workplace. If they're coming back into the workplace feeling positive, engaged, healthier, it's better for them. They have a better, probably go through the day a bit better as well, having better conversations with patients and people. And also for me, it just helps. And I think if an employee actually realizes and understands their role in this, and also a big part is what does well-being mean to them? You know, you ask 15 people around a table, what is well-being? And somebody may say, yeah, actually going to the gym's well-being for me. Another person may say, you know what, reading books is well-being for me. Somebody else may say, you know, just having time with family, or just doing photography, or just having time on my own is well-being. It sort of refreshes me and gives me that sort of energy I need. So well-being is a very, very broad, diverse, very personal thing. And I think we've got to give people space to be able to understand their well-being, but also give them space and opportunity to sort of grow in that and educate them in that. And I think, as Maxine said, you've got to give people choice. But choice is a big one. But the main thing is the employee realizes that what you're doing as a business is for them, and they trust it. There's compassion and there's empathy. So you as a business understand where they're coming from, they understand where you're coming from, and actually you're on a journey together. And I think that's really, really important. And a lot of companies I work with, that's missed. So you'll do great things about well-being. You see companies, you know, putting bowls of fruit out and take the stairs, not the lifts, and things like that. But the people are going, well, that's great, but why are they doing it? Mm-hmm. So there's a huge opportunity here.
Yeah, that all resonates with me, because we all have our well-being sort of sanctuaries, be they at work or at home. And for me, certainly, I live very close to Epping Forest here in northeast London, and a twice a day walk, morning and evening, with my dog in the confines of nature is what really helps me to recharge my batteries outside of work. So that Mark really resonates very strongly with me. So thank you for that. Let me come now to Sean McLaughlin, who is Compass Contract Director for HCA, one of our contracts here in London. Sean, I mean, you're on the front line. You've been on the front line. You've been a fantastic champion for wellness in general, mental health in particular. And I think you've done almost like a personal crusade to bring this to shine a light on this issue for people. And I think we thank you for that. Give me some reflections of how your journey has been, both personally and throughout this crisis, because you're certainly a hero to me. But let's hear it from the horse's mouth, if it were.
Thank you, Steve. So I think, I think if I put my sort of journey into context, I think I've had some personal challenges around mental health and mental sort of well-being, as you said, Steve. And I think, you know, I'm fortunate enough that I'm probably in a position now where I like to think it's under control, and you know, I'm able to function normally on a day-to-day basis. I think COVID in particular, and just looking at sort of the current situation and scenario, you know, when we sort of entered into this phase in January, February time, you know, I took a bit of a look at personally how I was going to react to this situation, and took some steps to try and sort of preempt some of the symptoms that I might otherwise have demonstrated. And I think, you know, going into it, for me, it was really important that we were supporting our teams and our frontline teams. There was so much unknown, still so much unknown, and I think it's, you know, we're all sort of probably a little bit fearful of the unknown to a degree. I think it's normal to be fearful of the unknown, but actually, I think in the environment that we were in and are in, you know, being so close to a disease that so little is known about still, can create real sort of fear for people. And I think, you know, we're fortunate. You know, Mark just spoke about, I guess, what I would sort of almost in layman's terms refer to as the nuts and bolts of the health and well-being program, and you know, how we would support people. And I think we're really fortunate that we're in a position as a business that the nuts and bolts are in place, and there are places to go for help and support. I think, you know, we've got like all organisations, got a way to go on the cultural journey, I think, but we're firmly on that journey. So yeah, I think it's dare I say, it's almost sort of an exciting time in terms of, you know, how we can react positively to what could potentially be quite a negative situation.
Yeah, I think that openness and honesty in the workplace is much more evident, and it's through people like you championing that cause that has really helped, I think, to inspire others around to be more open about their particular circumstances. It's no longer something that you need to be concerned about or hide. It's part of everyday life that affects us all. So thanks again, Sean. I think it's brilliant, and we'll certainly come back to you in a moment. If I can go across to Andy, you know, one of the inevitable consequences of the first wave was a high wave of absenteeism. We had obviously the technical absenteeism of self-isolation, shielding in some cases, but of course we did see, like all companies that work in and around the hospital environments, quite high levels of absenteeism, probably linked to what Sean was just alluding to, that there was some fear of this. Generally speaking, though, either with or without COVID, absenteeism or presenteeism is another word of putting it. I know you have some views on that, because that must be linked to kind of health and well-being in the workplace. Do you have a view on that, Andy?
Absolutely. And I think it's fair to say that our focus on health and well-being, which everyone's passionate about, hasn't really been focused particularly on nutrition as part of that strategy. We've got clear evidence that a good workplace environment that tackles food and nutrition and hydration can actually improve performance by typically 1 to 2% easily. And we can tackle as well presenteeism and absenteeism by the whole environment and the approach that companies and employers take to supporting staff, particularly in difficult situations like this. And, you know, Maxine has talked very clearly about the fact that, you know, it's a really challenging environment for healthcare professionals and for all staff working in the NHS. And there shouldn't be anything wrong with those little rewards. But there is increasingly, I think, a feeling of stigmatization, particularly in social media, where people are very quick to comment and to judge, but they don't actually understand the individual circumstances that people, and we are talking about people, employees and staff are actually going through. It's a very challenging environment, and they need to be supported, and they need to be given permission and the freedom to be able to take sensible choices, but actually to have those treats that we've talked about. They need to be able to work in an environment that supports, and we're talking about facilities management, of course, supports an opportunity to get away from the workspace and actually have good breaks and access to healthy nutrition and good hydration. If we start putting these little building blocks together, and this I think where our interest is we're working with HR directors, that the HR personnel function is much more interested nowadays in these sorts of strategies, because it's becoming more and more evident that these are very constructive ways of dealing with absenteeism and presenteeism, and that can only be a good thing. But it's both a holistic approach, but it's also taking an approach that this is just one strategy, and it's one part of the toolbox, I think, that we as organisations need to think about when looking after staff.
Yeah, quite a wide-ranging number of points there, and I think it certainly resonates with me. We probably run 70, 75 kind of high street coffee shops in hospitals up and down the country, and over the years, the last 10 years, I've noticed them being increasingly used by NHS staff to have impromptu meetings. And I think half of it is probably the press on meeting space, but the other half is they want to physically remove themselves from the clinical environment just for a moment so they can clear their heads, and whether that be with a latte or something, the two seem to be conducive to just escaping for a moment. So we often, what's the purpose of a coffee shop in a hospital? We often describe it as your sanctuary, your ability to escape. And just indulge me for a moment. I was in Adam Brooks Hospital not long ago, and this before the COVID crisis, and I was there having my own meeting, and we inevitably find ourselves in the local Costa or whatever that we run there. And I did happen to glance across to my left to the next table, and there was a young couple, clearly sort of antenatal with their baby, and the joy of it all was they just come out of whatever they were doing and they were celebrating with a coffee, and it was just a really wonderful thing to see. But when my colleague and I go out as we neared the exit there was equally there was a very elderly couple, and I think one chap had I'm presuming the husband had his hand around his wife, who was in tears. So clearly there was something there that had occurred in the drama of a hospital, which was entirely the polar opposite of the new birth and so on. And in that one moment, that encapsulated for me what those places are for. They're not really for coffee or a sandwich. They're places of escape, and I think that's what we brought. So thank you for highlighting that so well. Maxine, if I can come to you, just a very more basic question, probably that you might bat away, but is there anything we can eat more regularly? Are there any foods, superfoods or otherwise, that we can give us a slightly enhanced resistance to infection? I mean, I know it's not medicine per se, but go on, have a go.
There's always a lot of research going on in relation to particular nutrients and their role in health and well-being. There's a very small amount of evidence that certain vitamins, vitamin C, vitamin D, and zinc, may have a role in preventing pneumonia or other respiratory type infections in the over 65 age group. However, it's very early days. It's a very small link that has been found so far in the research. So really what we should be just advising everyone is that it's important to have a balanced diet. It's important not to exclude big food groups, because that can have an adverse effect on the overall plethora of nutrients that are available from eating a variety of foods. And particularly with COVID-19 and the risks that have been shown about people with higher BMIs than is advised, then being of good weight is also recommended. So there's no particular food that we can eat and it will keep us healthy. It's more about a holistic approach, variety. I could talk about 5 a day or 7 a day or 9 a day, but yeah, it's just a variety of food to optimize the breadth of nutrients that we get from our food.
It's a desperately unfair question, I know that, but I thought I'd ask it anyway.
Right.
Let's come back across to Mark. Mark, what do you think the obligations are on us as employers in the workplace? I think I think we all think we have policies and are doing all we can, but I'm sure there are elements of that are missing in our strategies. Do you have is there a magic formula for these are the 7 building blocks or 4 building blocks? What more can we do as employers?
So to every one of my clients, I say this, I say, as an organization employing people, you have a unique ability to fund an environment that's going to make a significant positive impact on people's lives. And that is true. So for me, that every organization, especially an organization of your size and what you do have the ability to actually put something in place. It may not be massive, could be quite small, but the ability to put something in place. For me, what makes a good health and wellbeing strategy? What are the building blocks? Sean Kemp mentioned it, the nuts and bolts. You know, some of it, you've got to build a good foundation. And for me, good health and wellbeing foundation is you need robust absence data. So you need to understand what is causing a big enough issue for your people to take time off work. Based on that absence, you then need an approach to your physical health. So what is your strategy around physical health? Also, what's your strategy around mental health? Because mental health is obviously a very, very big topic at the moment, but don't forget there is the physical aspect too. So, you know, with robust absence reporting, with people owning absence, with that getting alongside people really quickly, effectively, fairly and consistently, you're then saying as a business, we as a business can truly say we can support you from day 1, day 2. And we're here to help you. We're here to, you know, understand what's going on, get you into the right services, the right support, and support you back into work. And what that's going to give an organisation is really good data that's going to inform them decisions on actually what are people struggling with. Because I work with a lot of clients who the whole wellbeing topic is it's just a load of smoke. They don't actually know what well-being means and what employees would see as a positive around what do we introduce that people are going to use. If you know 60% of your population is going off sick because they've got issues with anxiety or issues with chronic back pain, you know, if you introduce an approach that's going to educate and support people with chronic back pain or things like anxiety, you know your people are going to start to think, actually, this business really is understanding me and actually is putting things in place that I'm going to use. And people then start to trust it and then they start to use it. I think one thing I would say is well-being, especially mental well-being, has completely got rid of the work-life, home-life divide. And one thing I think is a real positive is more and more businesses now are seeing it as a case of, okay, this is, we need to realise this is, I'm going to take your name, Sean. This is Sean. Okay, he has got a work hat, but also he's got a much bigger home hat. And we need to understand Sean, see where the pressure points are, and actually help him in both areas. Because if you help him at home, it's going to have a massive impact at work. If you help him at work, it's going to have a massive impact on home. So you get the fundamentals right, and then you start to explore actually what does well-being look like. And as Andy said, it is a toolbox, absolute toolbox. And a lot of companies try and rush the toolbox. Let's get as much in it as possible. For me, I say no, stop. Get a strategy in place, get your blueprint, get your journey, share that with the employee so they know the journey you're taking them on and why for example, why you're doing better absence reporting. It's not that you don't trust them, it's because you want to understand and be able to support them. And then what I would say is if you're going to do well-being, do 1 or 2 things a year, but very, very well. Because what we're trying to do here and what you're trying to do as an organization with the ability you have is to educate people. And you know as well as I do that then needs to start changing behavior. If you've got people who are feeling ill and that's down to diet, it's not an overnight thing. They're going to suddenly change their diet and start feeling better. This is a long-term approach. And so the short, quick wins are usually not that, it doesn't create behavioural and doesn't start to change culture. So, you know, and you've got to join it all up. So your services have to talk, your employees have to understand, you as an internal team have to start working together, which is great, but it's a journey, a long journey.
It is a journey, and I certainly would echo you kind of the hint there that a lot of companies are rushing to tick certain boxes to demonstrate a compliance culture with wellbeing, which is entirely the wrong way to go about this, isn't it? And I think that your point was well made and well received. Sean, if I can come to you, I mean, obviously employers and employees have an obligation to each other, but what about employees to each other? I think there is the corporate support, but then there's the more informal day-to-day social support, which inevitably teams in hospitals will develop. I mean, I would love, if I'm having a difficult day, it would be great for someone to notice. I think sometimes we're all so busy we don't often take time to stop and make that observation. I mean, you're particularly good at that. And how can you see that sort of informal chemistry playing out in the sort of environments that you've been in? Because I think probably underplayed, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree, Steve. I think it is underplayed. And thank you for saying I'm good at it. I think sometimes you probably get good at things because of your experiences. So unfortunately, probably. I think that is part of it, is I think we learn from our experiences, don't we? And I think, once you've experienced something and you've felt a certain way, you can almost to a degree recognize it in other people. And I think that probably is a big part of it. And I think that's also why I'm so keen to champion this sort of mental health and mental well-being in our business, because, I do feel passionately about it. I think from a support network point of view, it's vital, because it is the informal conversations that very often are the ones that have the most impact from a benefit point of view, I suppose. A lot of people aren't comfortable talking to their boss about things. And whilst we would encourage that, of course we encourage that, that's okay to feel that way. And actually, if you've got colleagues that you can talk to and colleagues that you can rely on, either to put things into perspective, or to actually, and probably more importantly, let you know that they are probably feeling the same way as you. Suddenly it normalizes things. And the moment things are normalized, it becomes more acceptable and it becomes okay. I think that the other thing that we should also probably just touch on for a second is this whole sort of thing of purpose. And I think, I mentioned just now about the unknown and the sort of the current circumstances, and everything's changing in the world, but having a purpose at work is so important. And I think if amongst your team and your colleagues, you can share that purpose as well. And that can be broken down from, it doesn't have to be a corporate purpose. It can just be about you and your team as well. So I think there's so many different sort of layers and facets to this. And, like the nutrition toolbox, I don't think there's not a one size fits all or at all, but I think it's a whole combination of things.
Absolutely, and all that is so true, and certainly on the purpose side of life, I never want to hear one of our domestics or cleaners say, "I'm just a cleaner." For me, they're there to help patients get better. That is their purpose. Once they connect with that purpose, they really understand how important that is. So yeah, thank you for that. Maybe I just wanted to relay one observation I've made over the years, and that is to sort of reinforce your kind of local, more informal observational stuff in our care homes in particular, and in our mental health units. It is often our people who are serving the food or are cleaning around the environment that first notice when a patient or a resident is not right. So we've made a habit of, one of our cleaners may approach a nurse and say, "Did you know that Flossie in bed 23 is, she's a little off today?" And very often, this is not a criticism of clinical staff, because they're massively busy, but they would not have noticed that. So I think there's a real significant role that our people can play in terms of observational well-being that I think is not something we make enough of. So yeah, absolutely vital role for me.
One of the things we encourage those people to do is to have that good relationship with the nursing staff. And it's back to one of the things that Andy said right at the beginning about the power of three. And also to get to know the dietitians. If you've got a regular ward hostess or host who works on the ward, for example, they'll get to know the ward dietitian and they can say, Flossie never eats all her dinner, you know, that kind of thing. So we encourage them to be part of the whole care that is given to patients.
And listen, Maxine, I know you've heard this before, but I found myself in hospital for 10 days some years ago, unexpectedly. And after the obvious thanks for the clinical staff for making me well again, once the prodding and the poking clinically finished, it was the conversations with the cleaner and the person who was feeding me that made me feel more normal. You're out of your home and suddenly you're in this kind of dormitory with other people and it's very stressful. And then you have these lovely interactions with cleaners and caterers and people serving you tea. And those are the interactions that kept my mental health strong once the clinicians had done their thing. And again, I think that's something as employees, our employees need to be aware of, that they can have a massive impact on the well-being in, as you say, Sean, normalizing things. So anyway, look, time is marching on, so we're going to change it up just a little bit. I'll come across to Andy again, if I may. Andy, you know, our world dietetically is massively regulated, isn't it? In fact, I've got a presentation that I make that talks about, you know, imagine if your restaurant was 400 yards from your diner, imagine if all your diners were ill, imagine if you couldn't season the food, imagine, and people say, my God, what kind of environment is that? And it finishes with me saying, welcome to the world of hospital catering. How do you navigate this kind of this soup of legislation and shifting sands and better hospital food panels and God knows what else? Because all that does impact on mental health eventually. But you know, you look relatively relaxed to me for someone who's got that job.
Yes, it's a good act I've been developing, Steve, over the years. It's incredibly diverse as an environment to work in. We all know that. It's challenging, and I think the particular challenging issue reflecting coming into this meeting is the fact that there is so much pressure being placed on everybody within this environment. And if we think about all the strategies, the legislation, the guidance, the fact that we've got a hospital food review, which fingers crossed will be published in the not too distant future, which I was delighted to be part of. We've got a national obesity strategy. We've got national guidance in relation to health and wellbeing in the workplace, particularly within the NHS. We've got an NHS people plan, which sadly makes no reference to nutrition and hydration, bizarrely. And we've also got, particularly in England, very localized approaches to what strategies should be. So that could be a trust by trust basis, whereas we're a UK body, so I've got nearly 10,000 members working around the UK and some overseas, whereas in Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, there may be, in a much smaller country, a much more joined up thinking and a holistic approach, a uniform approach to health and well-being. So the whole environment is incredibly complex, and in a way I'm fortunate because I don't have to navigate that because I'm not a clinician. I'm not involved with the delivery of health and well-being or food and nutrition. I am within my own employment environment, obviously. But when we actually begin to separate out everything that impacts on what we're trying to achieve within the NHS or social care and care homes, it's actually quite a minefield. And one of the issues, and coming back to my very first point again, is the only way really I think you can tackle that is taking a holistic approach from the point of view of the team who are there to deliver. So I, for example, I'm leading a working group that's looking at sustainability within the NHS and within community care, and what does sustainability look like from the point of view of food, diet and nutrition for the whole of the healthcare professions workforce. And we're looking at case studies and examples, and some of those are coming not from the healthcare professionals, but as you pointed out, very often the staff who are working on wards and actually coming up with great ideas around innovation about sustainability. And the only way that we can tackle this complex environment is actually taking this whole team approach, so that somebody who's maybe a cleaner or somebody else who's part of the team spots something. And it's absolutely vital they contribute to that, because not only are they contributing upwards, but they are the recipients from the downward feed of, well, these are the new guidelines, these are the protocols, this is what we've now got to deliver over the next year or two. So without that whole team approach, it's actually very difficult to understand how we can actually achieve everything that we've got to try and achieve in a very, very complex environment.
Yeah, amen to that. And I think certainly would underline that that top-down approach for policy doesn't always work. I think if you're not listening to the grassroots, then you're missing probably where the answers are, and that really does, what you've said really resonates with me. Maxine, the poor relation of dietetics is hydration, but some would say that proper hydration is probably as important, more important in some cases, to the well-being of an individual in hospital. What do you think about that?
Definitely. You've got the two go very much hand in hand. So adults need in the region of about 2 litres a day. So it doesn't really matter what that fluid is. Maybe it shouldn't all be beer, but whether it's water or tea or coffee, any fluid actually contributes to someone's hydration levels. And throughout the day as well, because our bodies are made up of so much water, particularly in the summer, people need even more fluid than that, because they sweat when it's hot, and we're lucky to have had a good summer this year. But yeah, hydration and nutrition together are key to well-being. And we have access to bottles of drink, of water, cups of coffee, but fountains of water, free water is also available everywhere, in all of our hospitals. And it's important that people are encouraged to hydrate throughout the day.
Yeah, and that water rounds, the water rounds that our staff make in hospitals are vital, aren't they? And they, as you say, food, water, and hydration as medicine.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we're kind of coming towards the end of the webinar, but I don't want to finish just yet. I want to come back to Mark, if I may, and say, Mark, look, if you've got any, as we stare down the possibility of a second wave, there is clearly a lot of national anxiety in the air, which we can't cure. We have governments and each other to try to deal with that. But in the workplace, any final words of wisdom in relation to this particular time that we're in?
I think, as people said, there's a big thing with COVID. It's just a complete unknown, isn't it? And interestingly, my next door neighbour, he's a professor in viruses. And as soon as this happened, I said, "Hey Nick, what would you recommend? What do we need to be doing to try and defend ourselves against any virus?" And he very clearly said, that there are 2 or 3 things that are known to improve our T cells, which T cells are the things that fight off these viruses. And he said, exercise, big one. Doing exercise, getting fit, getting healthy, being outside is a big one. Vitamin D, again, being outside is another big one. And these are, he said, 2 simple steps. I think also looking down, is there going to be a second spike? It looks across Europe, that it's coming and that there is. I think for organisations, it's actually having an approach and having that trust in place. And also, I've seen huge changes in the employees and employers' environment, because so many people are now working from home. But in a case of a hospital, I think I've got family who are clinicians. I've got lots of clinician friends, and they've all said, but both NHS and private, that they all feel very safe and it's a very supportive environment. And I think, again, as Maxine and Sean have said, it's understanding their purpose and role and actually bringing together as a team and supporting one another. For me, what I have seen, it has pushed anxiety but much higher. So a lot of people are feeling anxious about what's happening, what's next, what are the implications for me, and this comes for me back onto the approach to mental health. And for me, what I'm saying now is actually mental health. Everybody needs to own mental health. It's not just the role of 5 or 6 people in a business. Every single person out there has the ability to put their arm around somebody, or just say how you doing, or actually understanding, okay, I can see that person struggling, he or she's my colleague, they're my friend. But to have a bit of training to go, okay, what potentially are they struggling with, and actually I'm okay to ask questions. And most people the most things people are scared of is somebody crying in front of them, both from a line management perspective and a colleague perspective. It's okay to cry. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay, because actually we're here, and as a team and as a group, we're here to support one another. And I think the more of that environment can be brought in, then the better we're all going to be, and we're going to get through this. And again, I just think, I think a lot of people who are employed are actually very lucky, because they do have organisations that can support them in such vital ways. But another big one is common sense. Like the next door neighbour said, he goes, yeah, keeping healthy, but if you know somebody's not very well, don't go around, keep away. It's just using our common sense, really. So
those are wise words. Thank you. I think we need to develop the equivalent of PPE for the mind in the workplace, really, and put a protective arm around each other, really, and have that observational ability to notice when something isn't right. We are getting better at it, but there's a long way to go, of course. On a slightly brighter note, deaths are not yet following the peak of infections. In some cases, like in France, I think infections are higher than when they were in the first wave, but deaths are significantly lower, and the same in Spain. I'm obviously hoping that if we are similar to those countries, that we have a similar effect, that whilst infections may increase, we're hoping that deaths do not follow suit as per first wave. So it's certainly, going back to my earlier observations, the teams I met out there felt supported, and they said to me, to a man, we're ready, and I was very pleased to hear that. But I'm going to give the final words to Sean. Sean, of all those on the call, you're the one that's going to be in the trenches, so to speak. How are you feeling about life at the moment, and your ability with you and your colleagues to cope with what's coming?
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I think we're in a good place. I think over the years, you and the business have done really well at sort of giving us and our team's purpose in what we do in terms of saving lives and supporting patients to get better. That's what we do, and I think most of my colleagues certainly and our teams are probably quite looking forward to that challenge, actually, because that's the purpose, and that's what we do. I think if I've got sort of, I suppose, one hope and wish for the next period of time, just echoing a bit of what Mark has just said, I think if we can reach a point where we're as comfortable talking to each other and to our teams about how we feel and our feelings as we are in talking to each other about our sore knee, then I think we're doing really well. And I think if we can just put it into sort of that context, we'll be okay. I think as a business, we are doing well and doing better at signposting to people where to go to for help, because we're not all qualified to help people, but we're certainly qualified to listen and to point people in the right direction. And I think the nuts and bolts are in place. So yeah, feeling good.
Listen, that's a fantastic note to end on, and a slightly uplifting and positive one. Thank you, Sean, for doing that. And it's just my job now to thank our guests and all our panelists for such a fascinating webinar. Mark Giles from Salubrium, brilliant insight. Thank you very much. Andy, love to hear about your world and the challenges that you have, and you've been great on this webinar. And our very own Maxine, always a delight to see you, Maxine, and hear from you. So thank you for your contribution. And Sean, what goes without saying, you've been central to this call. So thank you, everyone, and we look forward to the next in a series of webinars, whenever that may be.
Thanks, Steve.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Cheers.